Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Futurists, your one-stop shop for science, history, politics, and all things related to the world of tomorrow.
Today we're going to be discussing the rise of the People's Republic of China, whether or not the country's success will continue, and what all this means for America and the rest of the world.
Okay, so just 1 week ago, China sent 30 warplanes into the air defense zone in Taiwan, marking a new height of tensions after a few months of increasingly aggressive behavior by the mainland. What do you think China's ultimate goal is in pursuing these militaristic measures?
So I doubt that China intends on an actual invasion of Taiwan, at least in the near future, because for one, they don't want to risk a nuclear war or World War III with the United States, and also because they've seen what happened with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and how it was pretty much botched. And so I feel that the main reason that they're conducting these measures is to just assert themselves as a major power and to demonstrate their military sufficiency to the rest of the world.
Okay, so I slightly disagree with your point of view on that. I think it is true that Russia's invasion of Ukraine definitely sent warning signals to China to not attack Taiwan soon. But I think their military buildup at the current rate, they're investing $250 billion a year on their military and increasing their nuclear warheads and stuff. So I think in the maybe next 15 years or so, they might actually attack. I think right now with these measures such as invading Taiwan's airspace, they're trying to threaten Taiwan into not declaring independence, and for the rest of the world to not abandon the one China policy and recognize Taiwan's sovereignty. So yeah, I think China's ultimate invasion would be to attack Taiwan, but I don't think they think they are strong enough right now, since the U.S. will actually defend Taiwan, as the current president Joe Biden and the former president Donald Trump have both said.
I think you do have a point, but as long as there is a president in power who is willing to defend Taiwan, I highly doubt that China would engage willingly in World War III, as they're probably aware that would result in devastation for both countries. But I guess if a president did arrive with a neutral policy into China, or even a maybe moderately pro-China policy, then they would invade Taiwan. But I don't think it's feasible in the near future for them.
Yeah, which raises a question of potential election meddling by the Chinese Communist Party in the future. Not that they if they find a candidate that they could that could have moderately pro-China views, they might try to support him.
That's true. I think that in 2020, China they must not have taken any actions, but their government did support Joe Biden. But I guess it did kind of backfire, as Biden's policies largely been the same as Trump's in fighting China.
Yeah. So let's talk about China's military buildup recently. Just generally, we know that they've increased their military spending. Now they're the second largest spenders in the world after the U.S. They spend $250 billion a year. They have the most ships in their navy. Their nuclear warheads are the exact number is not really known, since it's kind of secret. But I think I read somewhere that they have up north of 70 or something. So they're increasing their nuclear warheads and generally having a military buildup in the South China Sea. Do you have any other opinions on that? Or
I would say that I feel that many in America truly underestimate the power of China's military. For one, their manpower, their raw manpower is immense. Currently, I think 0.2% of their population is in their military. If they increase that to 1%, that would be 15 million troops. And also, furthermore, they have a monopoly on ballistic missiles. Basically, they have I don't know about nuclear warheads. They have a huge amount of continental missiles and anti-aircraft missiles. And as you said, they have a huge amount of ships. And I have even read that a lot of defense experts believe that if China and America went to a war today, China would have a large chance at defeating the United States.
Yeah, especially in areas around China. So China still does not have the capacity to engage in war anywhere around the world like the U.S. does with 19 aircraft carriers. But China has started to make military bases around the world. In Djibouti, in Cambodia, they made a naval base, and around China, in the Taiwan area, U.S. war games like simulations have shown that China might actually have the slight advantage due to their missiles.
Yeah, like I think that if a war started over Taiwan, like it would be very inconclusive, like who the victor would be.
Yeah, like I think the first attack, however damage the like country that attacks does in the beginning might actually determine the outcome of the war. But
Yeah.
also, yeah. So I also know that like their space program is also expanding. Like they're making larger space rockets, and they're making their own like space station. So just like that just kind of shows a general rise in their like tech power. Like they're the second country in the world to have a rover land on Mars. So like their technology is definitely improving, and like space rockets and ballistic missiles employ lots of the same technology. So that just shows that they're like actually they're actually like reaching the levels of US in military.
Yeah, there was a time period when America was like undoubtedly the world's center for innovation in business and technology, but that's honestly not the case anymore. Like China is in some regards like equaling and even some regards surpassing the United States. Like for example, around 400 over 400, I think like 473 of the 600 patents for AI in the world have been to China. And, like,
yeah. Also, I'm pretty sure since a couple years ago, China has surpassed the United States in the number of research published in the country, and that's impressive. But like the country does have 4 times the population of the U.S., but it just shows that they've been improving. Since the U.S. has been number 1 for such a long time by a large amount, it's hard to imagine that it was surpassed.
Yeah, another interesting note is that like in quantum computing, China is extremely close to the United States, and if China does end up like achieving a successful quantum computer before America, like that would truly devastate America's position as the world's technological center.
Yeah, transitioning to that conversation, I know that China's investing a lot in new technologies such as quantum computing, AI, biotechnology, like genetic engineering, stem cell therapies, and genetics, like everything like that. Semiconductors, electric vehicles, renewables. So the U.S. actually passed a bill recently called the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, brought by Senator Schumer and a Democrat from New York, and Todd Young, a Republican from I think Ohio or Indiana, I'm not sure. So that bill was $250 billion. It largely focused on quantum computing, semiconductors, all of that. The purpose of it was to compete with China in these regards. So the U.S. Like political institutions definitely do see the threat of China surpassing them in technology.
Yeah, I think that these are great measures that will help America to combat Chinese expansion, but I doubt that they will be able to successfully deter it, because the thing about China's government is they have much less constraints on their power than America, and like they can much easily like invest in like the technologies, as you said. Like for example, they just built a $2 billion like innovation park in Beijing, like, and like that, like they're able to easily create new infrastructure and create new resources for development.
Yeah, they're so authoritarian governments, their large and biggest disadvantage, which is like a pretty bad point, is that they're undemocratic. They do not represent the people. However, when like conditions align, when there's like one man rule, there is a really slight advantage in that they're really efficient in like the way they carry out their policies, since there is no political gridlock or disagreements anymore. So China completes like large infrastructure projects pretty fast, like in a couple years point. While like in California, I'm pretty sure they were trying to build a high-speed rail. It took them like 15 years just to plan and like ideate. Like the bureaucracy would just stop it happening. While in China, there's like a lot of high-speed rail right now. So even though they're really undemocratic and their system of government is definitely not what we want here or for anywhere, they do have slight advantages in some areas.
Yeah, that's very true. Like China's authoritarianism leads to immense efficiency in like these technological and like scientific developments, which in America it's largely like not based on government at all. Like it's largely based on independent investors, which has both its negatives and its positives. But it's just like a interesting difference between the two countries.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about like our main discussion, like our main first discussion was Taiwan. So let's talk a bit about the history behind that conflict. So as we know, the communists and the government Taiwan right now, the nationalists, they fought over like who controls China, and the nationalists fled to Taiwan. So that's how they established a government. So over that, we did not, since we supported the nationalists in the beginning, we did not recognize China. But since Nixon reapproached with Mao Zedong, we've recognized the one China policy, that the real China is the communist China. So let's debate if the Nixon reapproachment was a good thing, and later also debate if their joining of WTO was a good thing.
Yeah, I would argue that Nixon's reapproachment to China, well, theoretically it could have been like considered at the time a good thing. Like the planning behind it was immensely flawed. I believe the idea was that if China had better connection to the West, like they would like increase their democratization
and also abandon the USSR. And since USSR was the US's main enemy, I think that's the logic behind Nixon and Kinzinger's like logic.
Yeah, and I guess the USSR part, like I guess that was successful, but the democratization simply did not happen. Like China did not democratize at all, and in some ways it became more authoritarian. Like for example, during the Tiananmen Square massacre, that occurred after the reapproachment.
And yeah, also like the new legislation that made Mao Zedong president for life, even though they were supposed to like change their party's leader every couple years.
Yeah, and so I guess it benefited both America and China, but it benefited China way more. And like there was nothing that from that deal that America could not get from other countries.
I do get that like Nixon might not have predicted what was going to come with China, since in Mao's era they had pretty slow economic development. They were pretty much like an actual communist nation, and it only like their main growth happened after like 1990s with like some change to capitalism in like some areas, with the establishment of free zones in like Shanghai and stuff, and also their joining of WTO, which I think was a disastrous decision by the world community to allow them, since now they're not really like abiding by the world trade laws. They're engaging in trade. They have a large trade surplus, but they're not actually like abiding by all fair trade laws.
I definitely agree. We both agree that WTO, that decision was incredibly poorly thought out by the United States and by other developed countries. But I would argue that the Nixon reapproachment as well was a poor decision, because like even at that time, like even though China was not like incredibly developed, they were still developing like fairly fast, and like with their massive population, I think that Nixon could have predicted better, at least, some of the consequences of his decision.
Well, we all know that Nixon was not the best at predicting what was going to happen to him in the future, as we saw with Watergate. So. So let's talk a bit about the China-Russia axis. So these two like large authoritarian states are becoming closer and closer. As we saw in the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, China did not condemn Russia. They had some statements that quote unquote encourage peace, but they're still buying a lot from Russia. I think they're buying grain from Russia, and they supply them a lot. So they're still there's one of the main nations to not support Ukraine.
Yeah, it's also incredibly interesting that Russia actually delayed their invasion of Ukraine, so it would not coincide with the Winter Olympics in China. It just shows how strong their alliance is.
Yeah, that's a great point. Also, let's talk about China's international influence with the Belt and Road Initiative. Do you have any facts you want to share about that?
Yeah, so China has actually been investing in a large amount of countries across the world, particularly in Africa, where they've actually I think they built one of the African Union centers in Ethiopia, and so this has caused many African countries to become somewhat reliant on them economically, which many people are calling a form of neo-imperialism or Chinese imperialism.
Yeah. So I saw that they've been investing in infrastructure projects all over Asia and Africa as they're in their Belt and Road Initiative. So some interesting consequences of that was that in Sri Lanka, I'm pretty sure China acquired 15,000 acres of land on a 99-year foreclosure. There was a port in Sri Lanka that they loaned to, they loaned $1.1 billion to Sri Lanka for them to build it, but they could not pay interest back. So China just straight up acquired a part of Sri Lanka's land. So they're kind of becoming hegemonic and decreasing other nations' sovereignty. They also did that with Mozambique, I think, and yeah.
That's really interesting. It's kind of ironic that China is now doing these 99-year lease deals after the British used to do it with them, with cities like Hong Kong and Macau.
Yeah. Another interesting thing that not many people know about, I just know that since I'm of Iranian heritage, but I'm from Iran, so the China signed a 25-year deal with Iran recently. They never released the full text of the document, but some leaks happened that showed that they're buying Iranian oil on really large discounts, up to 70%, and they've gotten rights in the Persian Gulf and the Oman Sea that of fishing rights and crude oil exploration rights. So they've gotten a lot of economic benefits, while I think they promised the Iranian government to help them in keeping themselves in power and helping them in industries, in military industries. They also signed a deal with Pakistan, establishing the China-Pakistan corridor. They kind of have a shared adversary in India, and they also I'm pretty sure China now has really direct access to the port city of Gwadar and Karachi, which is pretty interesting that they have access to new maritime and waterways.
That's very interesting, and China is definitely investing a lot in that entire region, the Central Asia, Middle East region, and I've heard it's because they want to build somewhat of a new Silk Road, or a series of trade routes that ultimately lead back to China, which creates an alternate trade pathway from the ones usually used by the Western nations, like the Suez and Panama Canal. And I also feel China, Russia, and Iran may be creating somewhat of a axis or an alliance that will be a contrast or a deterrence to the United States and NATO.
Basically, the axis of evil, as former President Bush called it, is what they're creating.
Yeah, definitely a new axis of evil. We should also discuss the rapid economic growth of China. I've heard that China's GDP increased 40-fold since 1978, which is absolutely crazy.
Yeah. In economics, I think there was a forecast that came out that said in 2028 they would surpass the United States in GDP. Their population is 4 times greater, so in GDP per capita they would still be lacking, but their whole nation as a whole is surpassing the United States in economics. I think in 2013 they surpassed the United States in purchasing power parity, and they have a large trade surplus for the United States as well.
Yeah, but regardless of their population size, it would still be incredibly shocking if America was able to lose its status as the world's number one GDP. Even though the Soviet Union, even though it had a larger population than America for most of history, it still never surpassed America's GDP. And I'm pretty sure that actually America's had the highest GDP of any country since the very early 20th century. So that would mark a very symbolic end in American hegemony around the world.
Yeah, other economic issues to talk about with China, I think one would just be how they exploit U.S. companies. So they attract U.S. companies through cheap labor and promises and stuff. However, when companies actually go to China, I'm pretty sure in multiple instances they've been like intimidated. They are not able to like publish some stuff or like take a stance on some issues, and also like they're required to train some Chinese workforce, as well as like yeah, just like generally they're not allowed to leave the country afterwards. I'm pretty sure if they try to leave, they just nationalize their companies, like their fast facilities in the country.
Yeah. One thing I'm wondering is like your 2028 figure. I wonder if that could be affected by China's like zero COVID policies, which have kind of like harmed the economy a lot because of like how strict their lockdowns are.
Yeah, their growth is kind of going down. I think they had like a 6% growth recently, and they've been like around the 12-13% range in the early 2010s. So their growth is definitely slowing down. I've also read that their population is aging, like one of the fastest aging populations in the world. So that will definitely like decrease their rate of growth.
Yeah. On the note, we should discuss the trade war between the United States and China under Trump and like and somewhat continuing under Biden. Like, do you think that like positively like affected America's situation with China, or do you think it like did not like have a major impact?
I think there was some benefits and some cons to it. So the benefits I think were that like they definitely did damage the Chinese economy, as they try to sign a deal with the United States in like 2020 that they would try to decrease the trade balance or whatever, like invest more. But I think the cons was that it also hurt the U.S. as China put sanctions back on the U.S. So I think the average American consumer had to pay like $1,000 a year more in goods, and for like 2 quarters, it slowed down growth from like 3.5% to like 0.5%. So, but it also decreased China's GDP. So like, the person's stance on that will really be based on is it okay for the U.S. to take a hit economically to also damage China economically?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, what you've said is like very interesting, and I would note that like the degradation to America's economy was arguably a lot less than degradation to China's economy. Like China did face like major damages, and like their economic growth slowed down like a ton. As you said, like 6% growth, which is a ton lower than their normal growth. But it did obviously like affect U.S. consumers and especially U.S. farmers. So yeah, it is definitely like a matter of philosophy whether you believe America should be able to take a hit to harm the Chinese.
Yeah, let's also talk about a Paris Climate Accord. So, the U.S. recently got back into the accord as it had got out under President Trump. And one of the complaints that former President Trump had about the Paris Climate Accord was that China's promises were too low. I think China promised to zero out its emissions by 2060, while most other nations promised to do that by 2050. It is notable that China does have the highest renewable production rates in the world, and also the highest amounts of electric vehicles, but they're also the world's #1 producer of coal, and they have promised to max out their coal production by 2030 and come back down, but China's not really known to be the best to carry out its promises, and also not the most transparent government. So they are the I think the #1 CO2 emitter right now.
Yeah, so obviously like combating climate change is a goal that everyone like wants to see happen, like America, China, India, everyone, like all countries. But the Paris Climate Accord, like simply, in my opinion, like did not hold China to account. Like as you said, many world leaders, like as they have argued, like, and one of the things you said, like, which is very, very striking, is that China actually like they've set their peak emissions goal for 2030, which means they don't plan on reducing emissions at all until 2030. So they plan on essentially continuing emissions until 2030, and only then would they stop carrying out the emissions. And also, like as you've said, that their reports are often like very inflated, and the BBC did an investigation into China's energy reports, and they found that like the country has really like not taken much progress at all in fulfilling the few climate goals it did agree to in Paris. So I think that overall it was like a deal that did not like correctly enforce and did not even correctly like outline goals for China, and so it was a pretty bad deal for America
I
in the
think
world.
I slightly disagree with that. I think the Paris Climate Accord was a good deal in that it like made a beginning framework for countries to come together to like reduce emissions overall. But yeah, I think it definitely has to be strengthened because in its current form, it does not correctly enforce every country to take action. I think the original goal was for like countries to come back together every couple of years to decrease emissions again, like to increase their promises. And it has worked in some countries, like in European countries who are generally responsible. But in the developing world, they definitely still have to like the international community has to force them to like uphold their promises. So one could argue that it's a good framework, but definitely not what the end deal should be, because by itself it's not strong enough to reverse climate change.
Yeah, I would say that President Trump's decision to totally pull out of the climate accord was probably too brash and unnecessary. But at the same time, the deal has to be definitely renegotiated in order for it to like better serve its purpose as combating climate change. As like China is the world's like biggest CO2 polluter, and if they continue like with little enforcement and with very like minimal goals, like there's not going to be much progress in the global fight against global warming.
Okay, one more debate that I want us to have is about TPP, the I think was a Transatlantic Pact or something?
Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Trans-Pacific Partnership, sorry. Yeah, so that economic deal, I know that we slightly disagree on that, so I thought it was a good point of debate. So I thought that it was, even though it would, as most trade deals do, it would slightly hurt the U.S. Workforce, it would lead to an increase in GDP as well. But I thought the main goal of TPP was for the U.S. to have an economic partnership with every other like important Asian and Pacific country like Japan, New Zealand, Australia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, so that China's economic influence in the Pacific would slightly decrease. And after the U.S. pulled out, I'm pretty sure China signed a deal with all the other nations except for the U.S., like a similar trade deal. So that's why I thought it was a bad deal. I think you might slightly disagree with me on that, so I'd like to hear your points on it.
I think that like there's honestly better ways to combat Chinese economic growth than like creating a trade deal that mostly benefits U.S. corporations, and even then like mostly benefits foreign countries like much more than America. Like I feel like these trade deals, like they're very good in theory. Like obviously in economics, like comparative advantage and absolute advantage, like trade is supposed to always benefit both countries. But in practice, when countries like set guidelines and tariffs which are like much higher than America's, and especially when like with all these like massive benefits to corporations, I feel that the trade deal like mostly would have helped a select few corporations in America, mostly would have harmed the American workers, and generally would not have been a great deal for America.
Yeah, so our point of disagreement on that, it would probably stem from me just being like really pro like free trade and like reducing tariffs in general. Although with China, I see like a slight exception, but that's probably where we disagree on it the most. So like, I would like to transition the conversation to the South China Sea conflict. I know that like there's over the maritime like ways, the islands there, and just like crude oil and gas exploration, China, Philippines, and a bunch of other like Asian Pacific countries have disagreements. They're like China's making artificial islands, is increasing its military presence there. So I thought that's that, and also the like recent coup in Myanmar where the pro-China like military took over, as well as North Korea's just general presence and occasional like threatening of the West, shows that China's influence is increasing especially in the Pacific and Asian regions.
Yeah, for many years, America's foreign policy has largely been centered around Europe and especially Russia's influence.
And Middle East.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I feel like the Asia Pacific region is like should really be our main concern because for one, that's where like the majority of the population is located, and that's where most economic growth in the world is located. And China's like, as you said, China has been expanding rapidly in their influence, and many pro-China governments like are widespread in the region. So I feel that America should be doing more to combat China's expansion, either through more military bases, more investment,
I think,
or a combination.
Yeah, I also think that they're actually increasing their influence in the United States as well. So by like bringing over corporations there, they're kind of silencing U.S. corporations to speak out against China. So for example, NBA players, just the whole brand, and a lot of Hollywood movies, since they have Chinese investors, they like prevent them from speaking out on Taiwan, on Hong Kong. And like I saw it recently that like John Cena had like a tweet that was very controversial, where he had a map or something that had Taiwan as part of China and not as a separate entity. So it just shows that they're increasing their culture and economic influence so much that they're even having influence in the United States, which is supposed to be a free country.
That's true. And yeah, a lot of these like Hollywood like celebrities and many corporations really do like bend down to China's will just so they can like reap the economic benefits of a 1.3 billion person like country's population. And this does like have a very negative effects on America's like image in the world even.
Yeah, also the US has taken some measures recently, such as making Quad with Japan, Australia, like India, those countries to counter China. And also like pretty recently they sold submarines to Australia to like increase Australia's military power. They've tried to like ban TikTok, an app that has like privacy concerns. They like tried restricting like WeChat, some other like Chinese entities. So the interesting thing is that China blocks all Western like social media and like news apps like Twitter, Google, Instagram, Facebook, all of that in China. But we have Chinese apps in our like markets. Like we have WeChat, like whatever they use in their own like China net that's separate from the rest of the World Wide Web. We actually have those apps in the Western Hemisphere, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that America definitely has to take more drastic action if the country really wants to like end the rise of China in the world, like militarily, financially, and like through influence. And I feel that like like the steps you mentioned, like
I don't think we should restrict freedom by like just like completely banning apps, but I think we can definitely take measures to like increase cybersecurity and like increase the privacy of like negotiate ways to increase the privacy of our users in the United States. Like pretty sure like they're like Huawei, the 5G networks that we're trying to build, they had major security concerns with like spying and stuff. So that's why most Western nations banned them. So same steps, like we definitely have to look out for that. They're trying to like increase their economic influence while also like increasing their espionage and and also like just their general political influence in the West.
Yeah, any Chinese-owned apps or websites should be like heavily monitored in the West to make sure that they don't have like a serious ties to Chinese government. And I feel like the steps you mentioned in general like aren't enough to combat China, just because China's government has taken like huge measures to combat America. Like they've been manipulating their currency arguably to favor their trade surplus.
That is true. The yuan is now like a pretty important trade currency.
Yeah, and they've been investing around the world, as we mentioned in our conversation on the Belt and Road Initiative. And what steps do you think that like we could take to like truly like deter China's influence?
This is really hard. I don't think there's like a really set answer right now, because if there was, we would probably take it.
Yeah.
But generally, we're just trying to sanction them as much as we can, and trying to like decrease their like espionage capabilities, like with banning Huawei. We could probably do that if they try to do that with other apps. Like if they actually try to like acquire, like have more controlling capacities on TikTok, we could probably actually like take actions against that app. Or with like any other technology that they have, we should definitely try to have Western technology still be the main like source of communication and for other utilities in the West.
Yeah, I've read that some interesting arguments that America and China should totally like decouple, meaning that they should like economically go back to the pre-Nixon era with like essentially zero economic connections.
Which is pretty hard, since just like by going out to any grocery store or like any store, you see a lot of made in China signs.
Yeah, it would be difficult, and it would probably harm America's economy, but it would definitely like have extremely negative effects on China. Like would probably like end their era of economic growth.
Yeah, but the one problem I see is that the European nations, like the other countries in the Western world, they're not as strong as the United States against China. So, for example, in the G7 and like G20 summits, the United States try to put out statements that like really condemn China, but the European nations really weaken the statements every time, since they have like large trade benefits. And I think they're making the same mistake they made with Russia. Their large oil dependence on Russia is now preventing them from taking like good action against Russia to like stop its invasion of Ukraine. And now they're making the same mistake now with China. And in the near future, they're gonna probably regret that too.
Yeah, these actions will seem very like, I guess, stupid if like China does end up invading Taiwan.
Yeah. You want to talk a bit about COVID?
So China's COVID policies were incredibly harsh, and they've like essentially locked down their citizenry anytime a small outbreak has occurred, in contrast to like the generally lenient policies, relatively, in America and Europe. So this has like harmed their economy, and it's slowed their economic growth. But
yeah, not just that, they've just been like really they've been really secretive and not transparent about the whole like COVID origin. Like any WHO or any other investigation into the origins, they blocked it. They've censored like the scientists that first tried to expose COVID. They knew of its existence a bit before they told everybody else, and until it began spreading. So they harmed the world that way. They did the same thing with SARS back in the day, and they tried to cover it up a lot. And the lab leak theory, although we can't like 100% confirm it yet, it does seem a lot more probable now that they've like stopped these investigations. And there's been a few like papers coming out that have shown that it could be possible. The like animal like transfer theory with like bats, that was the main accepted hypothesis. Now it's less accepted, and although the jury's still out, it's still like it's very probable that it actually leaked from a Chinese lab.
I feel that America is not like pressing China enough on the COVID origin concerns, as you said. Like China has been like known to be incredibly like secretive and even like lying in their reports, and most of our like non-biased reports have found that Chinese government engaged in deep negligence through the beginning of months of the pandemic in 2020 and late 2019. And I feel like the WHO also is like extremely influenced by China, and I think China has donated a ton of money to them, and many of their leaders have been like affiliated with China, and I think that like generally like
I think the whole
pressing China on this.
I think the whole United Nations like complex with like WHO and everything, like China sits on the Human Rights Council right now, which is pretty bad. Like that should not happen. So I think the whole idea is good. I don't think we should leave WHO or the UN Human Rights Council or any of that, but I think we should definitely try to reform it a lot, since these institutions are there to like uphold democratic values, uphold human rights values, and not just like not try to bend to like China's influence, growing influence. Also,
I like that you touched on human rights, and that's probably where we should like go to our discussion next. But before that, I want to mention like I would argue America should actually leave the WHO, because for one, our massive donations to WHO, which like outpace any other country. Like for that, I would expect like a serious benefit to America, right? but like WHO has been extremely aligned with China, and they've been affiliated with China in many ways. And like in the early months of the pandemic, I think they didn't even allow Taiwan to like speak in their meetings. And I think that like donating this much to WHO as they continue this pro-China policy is like a negative to America.
Where I would disagree on that is that although it is true that they should definitely try to reform China's influence in WHO, WHO still does a lot of good things around the world, like with Ebola or like any epidemics in Africa, any like famine in Africa. Even with the vaccine distribution, it's helped developing nations. Like the first world countries in the West, everybody just bought the vaccines first because they had the larger like financial power. But these like growing nations like a Uzbekistan or a Tajikistan or like Sri Lanka, these nations like their efforts to end COVID was helped a lot by WHO. So I think it still has some benefits, and that's where we disagree a bit on that. Also, I think China published like so much fake data with their COVID numbers that they just ruined like everybody else's response. So they should definitely be held accountable on that too.
Yeah, they publish fake data in general, not even just for COVID. Like they posted a fake data for like their climate crisis concerns, like on energy usage. They posted fake data for like the concerns about Uyghurs and Tibetans.
Yeah, that's probably where we should lead. I would like to speak on the Uyghurs first. So since 2017, I've read that 16,000 mosques in that region have been destroyed. They've been labeled like terrorists, and they've been put in internment camps, in boarding schools. They've been separated from their families. There was forced sterilization, contraception and abortion, and they've been stopped from their religious practices, and there's been just general abuse. So those measures definitely violate the second article of the Genocide Convention, which I think, in my opinion at least, but I think most people would probably agree on this, should have it labeled as a genocide. And their actions against an ethnic minority in their country is pretty bad.
China's human rights situation in general is terrible. Like as you mentioned, their treatment of Uyghurs has been widely condemned, as well as their treatment of the region of Tibet in general. After the 2008 protests, especially, like the suppression was like horrific, and they've actually been like suppressing Tibetan language and Tibetan religion as well. And they continue to like engage to like ban the Dalai Lama or like keep him in exile from the region. And also, like, even with their own citizens, as we saw in Tiananmen Square, they commit like major atrocities.
Yeah, also Hong Kong, where the 2019-20 protests happened against the extradition bill that would basically transfer more power to China to like silence democratic speakers in Hong Kong. There was widespread protest. The Hong Kong police cracked down like violently, as we saw in like the Prince Edward Station attack. And a lot of activists were detained and later abused and tortured. There was like pretty sure the Hong Kong Parliament was absolved, and it's been like slowly absorbed into China. They used COVID as excuse to like stop protests, and now it's just basically like mainland China. It's lost all of its like remaining freedoms.
Yeah, China's attacks on Hong Kong were definitely like horrific, and also like something I should point out is that China remains like strongly supported by their mainland Han Chinese population, though, which largely like is the main reason that they're kept in power, the CCP.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're large propaganda networks, and like stopping all Western influence definitely helps a lot on that.
They're great internet firewall, as they say.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure most like anybody that's been to China would probably know a lot about that internet firewall. Also, they're just generally like to just basically censor everything. Tiananmen Square is an example of like resistance against the Chinese government that's been censored a lot. But they censor anything that's like pro-Western, any like Western movies. Like I'm pretty sure they were trying to stop like new movie from having the Statue of Liberty in it because they were trying to show that in China too. And they did not want the Statue of Liberty to be shown. And like she was made president for life, and I'm pretty sure like Jack Ma, he spoke out only a bit against like the Chinese government. I think he disappeared for a couple days, and just their general like social credit score and security cameras. I think they have more security cameras than any other nation than all other nations combined. They've actually tried to get the male genetic data of 100 million of their population and store like genetic databases. So they're like massive incursions on privacy. If you want to talk about the social credit score, that would be pretty nice.
Yeah, so China has implemented a policy called social credit, where any action you take, like not even financially, like any action you take in general, is monitored by the Chinese government through a network of security cameras, and it's used to like determine like everything from like your like general like financial credit to whether you can like ride on airplanes even, and it's basically like determined by like how moral your actions are in the views of the Chinese government. Like for example, if you like support Chinese government propaganda, your social credit score is improved, and if you like attack the CCP, your social credit score is disproved. It's generally a very Orwellian system, very like anti-democratic, and
Yeah,
its
just, like,
main purpose is to promote the CCP.
Yeah, just like even like general like jaywalking, like small like littering, all of it's seen by security cameras. They basically control like all aspects of your life. It's pretty Orwellian, as you said. And I would also like us to talk about a one child policy and like two child policy, if you like.
Yeah, so the one-child policy was implemented in, I believe, the 70s or 80s, but I'm not totally sure on that. And it said that like Chinese couples can have a total of one child, like with very few exceptions. And so this was meant to combat overpopulation in China. And its effect was like incredible. It had a ton of unintended consequences, essentially, where like the Chinese couples would abort their baby girls forcibly so they could have baby boys, and like other like things like that. But this was actually like ended in 2015 and replaced with the two-child policy, which lets couples have two children, as the name implies. And this is like to deter like aging population.
Yeah, twofold improvement in freedom in China. Let's go. So yeah, let's end the debate with two questions.
Yeah.
First off, we kind of talked about this, but we can just like really briefly say it again. Who do you think would beat each other in a China-U.S. war? And also, do you think will China forever rise, as the Chinese century idea suggests, or will it like stagnate and decline eventually, as did like Japan in the 1990s after a huge period of growth?
I would say that China. Okay, first question. China would definitely beat U.S. in the war today. Well, I mean, I guess it would depend on like the terms of the war, but in the most like likely war, in a U.S.-China like Taiwan war, like China would probably beat America due to their like naval like number of ships, their arguable naval superiority in the region. I think America does have an air force advantage, but like in a different like region as well. Like I doubt America would be able to win, and also due to their large amount of missiles, like they'd probably be able to counter an aircraft attack. And I would say that it really depends on what actions America takes. For your second question, but I think that like if things continue how they're going right now, 21st century is probably going to be the Chinese century, due to like China.
I think there's been a slight disconnect on your voice. Okay, let me say my point of view too then. So, I think in a U.S.-China war, we actually are still gonna beat them, since we have, I think, even though they have more ships, I think we still have a naval superiority. We have like more advanced ships, we have more aircraft carriers, we definitely have a better air force, and we've been involved in so many wars recently, like in Afghanistan, Iraq, even in like Bosnia, Serbia, in like Pakistan against terrorism, in like countries like Somalia, Mali. Like we've been involved in a lot of wars, So we have the experience that China does not have in actual combat. So I don't think China will actually do as well as they do in like their like training as like in their military exercises against the U.S. But in like 10 years time, my answer could definitely change as China's military buildup is helping it become more dominant military wise. And also for the second question, I think in my personal opinion, I think China will probably advance until like 2035ish and stagnate due to its aging population. And I think the Western efforts against China will increase as we go on, as China's human rights abuses become more and more. I think they're going to lose their popular support among people of the world, even in countries, especially in countries that they now are helping in the like Belt and Road Initiative, as they call, like not actually helping, like as they say they're helping them. So like the general view of the people of those countries are going to be anti-China after situations like in Sri Lanka, where they required the 99 foreclosure on a port and like just plundering other countries' resources. So I think the new anti-imperialism movement is actually going to be against China. So even though I see them going forward until like 2035ish, I think they're going to decline eventually, as is the Soviet Union. But if I'm wrong, I think, which is very probable, I think it's going to have lasting consequences on humankind. I think it might lead to like lower freedom in general, lower like democracy indexes around the world. Like
China's vision of humanity in general is like very contrasting to America's vision of humanity. Before we end off, I give like two counter arguments to what you said. First of all, like although China and America are closely matched in like the war games, as you said, like even if China wins, like China has one major advantage in that their allies have like much stronger like militaries than America's allies. Like America's military is essentially single-handedly defending like most of its allies, like Germany, most of Europe, Japan, South Korea. Like these countries have fairly weak militaries, and they're like totally reliant on America. Whereas China is complemented by strong armies like Russia and Pakistan and like Iran. And for the Chinese century question, I think that demographic trends, which you noted for China, those would apply, but they would also apply to much of the world too. Like for America is expected to also have a much aging population. And also China has a big advantage in that their government can control their population growth, as we saw with the one-child and two-child policies. Like what if they just create measures like, I don't know, like the three-child policy, which like promotes like more population growth in China.
I would, for your second point, I agree, but for your first point, I don't think America's allies are actually like weaker military-wise than China's allies. I think Japan and South Korea rank 4th and 5th in military power indexes. Even though they do not have nuclear weapons, they actually have a pretty strong army. I think like countries like Taiwan, Philippines, Australia, all of those could help. And Europe, although it's like pretty weak, and I don't actually see them like helping a lot. I think in the event of actual war, like in Iraq or Afghanistan, NATO is going to actually help. So France, UK, Germany, all of those, even though they're not as strong militarily wise as like Russia, combined they probably are a pretty good help. Although Russia, I think is actually like China's like best military partner. I don't think Pakistan's pretty strong too, but I don't think countries like Iran are gonna actually be much of a help, since their stats are actually kind of quite bloated. And
military strength is always something that's like debatable. Hopefully we'll never have to see like which of our predictions is true.
Many times in history, the militaries that have been weaker on paper have won, and many times in history the predictions have actually come out right. So we can't really say until on the unfortunate event of actual war.
One thing for certain is that a population of 1.3 billion, second largest economy in the world with rapid growth, China is definitely like the country to watch for the foreseeable future.
we all have to keep an eye on China, as we did with like the USSR in the last century. In the American century, this century, the eyes will be on China. Will it actually be the Chinese century? That remains to be find out. And yeah.
With that, we'll close this episode of The Futurists, and be sure to watch our next episode, which will be on historical conquerors. And see you later. Thanks for listening.
All right, see you.